Good morning, everyone. I'm Ivan Habel. I'm the Executive Director of the Belfry Theatre. And for those joining from outside of Victoria, the Belfry Theatre is located in Victoria, BC.
Good morning. I'm the Artistic Director of the Belfry Theatre. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Gregor Craigie, host of CBC Radio's On the Island and host of the Belfry Theatre's Before Play series for the last 8 years.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Ivan. And thanks to everyone who's joining us online. It's a shame we can't see you here in person, but such are the times. And I had hoped to be back here doing a before play ahead of the next production. And I know everyone in the theater community, everyone here at the Belfry had hoped to be here under very different circumstances. But here we are, and it's good to have an update this morning on where things are. And Michael, I want to ask you first about the current global situation and how the theater fits in. We're in the midst of a global pandemic, of course, but also around the world, protests, uprising. People are protesting against racism and police brutality. And I want to ask you, first of all, what you see as the role of theater in this time.
Well, I think the role of theater has always been to tell stories, and stories that help us to understand the world around us and understand humanity and the human heart. Were we able to perform at the moment, we would be addressing those issues and putting stories on stage that help our audience to see the world they know, but from a different perspective, and also to learn about worlds that they don't know. So at least the season so far, the 2019-2020 season, as far as we got to, up to March the 13th, we had dealt with a global crisis in the children. We dealt with racism in Bang Bang, mental health in Every Brilliant Thing, and racism against Indigenous people in the Ministry of Grace. All within engaging stories and oftentimes with a lot of humor. But I think that's our role, to address those issues. And when that time comes back that we can once again be on this stage and addressing our audience with our seats when there are actually people back in them, that's going to be what we start to do again. And that's what our audience, I believe, comes to the Belfry for plays that engage them, but also present them with things that they can take away. Some of the comments we got from people who were donating money back from the tickets that they couldn't use. Someone said that there was a moment in a play where a penny dropped for her, and she understood the residential schools on generations of Indigenous people, and that's hopefully what can happen. During this particular time, our role is to kind of monitor what's happening, to try to stay ahead of things that are happening. As far as racism goes, I think we'll probably address this in a little bit, but to examine ourselves and see how we can change and change with the times.
And from an artistic point of view, and not knowing when you're going to be back on stage, but do you foresee continuing or changing that focus on highlighting the issue of racism? Because as you say, you've done that. You've had that in mind with past choices. I wonder, given what you're watching about these Black Lives Matter movement and protests, if you anticipate it may change and inform your future programming decisions.
I think very much so. Sure. And also, Ivan and I have been talking quite a bit about what is the play that we come back with, and how do we can't just put on another play after everything that the world has been through. We need to find a play that speaks to what's been happening for the last 4 months and in the recent times as well. So yes, definitely we need to look for those plays that speak to what's happening.
Ivan, what about that? As an institution, you're choosing the art and you're telling stories, but you're also reflecting on the way you do it and the way you operate. I wonder how the current times, both the pandemic, but also the real discussion about racism is informing the way the Belfry may operate in the future. Is that, I mean, you've been so focused on the pandemic, but is that going through your head as well? Will you be reevaluating or looking at that in the future?
Yeah, I think as an arts organization, we're in a constant state of evaluation about not only what we do, but how we do it and who we're doing it with. So certainly, I'm on a couple of different committees on a national board for the theater community, and those conversations are very active right now in terms of not only what kinds of things, what kinds of actions can theaters take, but how soon those actions need to occur. So in terms of the Belfry, certainly a re-examination of some of our structures, of some of the kind of levels of authority that people inside the organization have, and also looking at, in terms of our operations, how can we best ensure that those people who are here or working with us, whether on staff or whether as guest artists, have the confidence in the agency to keep us informed of their levels of comfort, and where there may be discomfort, that we know how to address that because we know it's happening. But in terms of overall operations, yeah, I think I'm certainly starting to examine and need to get involved in conversations around what does our board look like, what does senior staff look like, and that's particularly important for an organization that is frankly led by two older white guys, when the community is very much demanding and calling for change, and a change of that perspective that's brought. So that will be a part of our conversations as we go forward as well, is how do we ensure that authority and power is given to those people whose voices have not had the privilege of that power in the past.
This is such an unusual time. I want to talk and switch gears and talk about the pandemic and how it's affected what you do, the craft of theater. I've been told there was a certain amount of praise for the way in which the Belfry handled the shutdown. Can you tell us a bit more about that, Ivan? Explain some of the things that were done when this all came about, when it started.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, one of the first things that we had conversations about on a senior level and with the board and between Michael and I, and it was, for one thing, it was kind of difficult for me. I was actually in Toronto working with the National Association at the time that it really kind of was clear that we needed to do the shutdown. So the conversations were distant for me. But the first thing that we determined was that we were going to ensure, we were in the Spark Festival, as you know, and we had artists both here who had traveled here to be here, and we had artists who were about to be here. So we quickly determined that we would pay out those artists, including the ones who had not had an opportunity to actually come to the Belfry, so that they would not be at a loss. We also very quickly made the determination that our staff would stay on payroll, even though we were at reduced operations. And at the time, we put a time limit on that and said that we would review it, not knowing what was happening, because this was before any of the government support programs were in. We just made those decisions clearly. And then the other thing that we did in terms of our guest artists and the artists who come to work with us, we had artists who were actually, who were obviously coming for the last final performance, were getting ready to be here. And we determined that we would pay out a good portion of that contract, even though it had not yet started, nobody had actually arrived. And we determined that because we felt it was fair that they had set aside that time for us. And we also knew that it was going to be a difficult time for independent artists, especially independent freelance artists who rely on a contract-to-contract basis for their livelihood. And it's a difficult, precarious kind of livelihood. So we wanted to play our role in securing them for as much time as possible by ensuring that we paid those fees out. So those are the primary things we did. And then we started having more active ongoing conversations with staff and with artists and with our national colleagues about how do we support the artists, and internally, how do we continue to support staff? So certainly the government benefit programs helped us a lot, and we managed to continue to extend how long we could keep staff on, and to keep open our conversations about how do we engage with artists, and how do we ensure that we can help to ensure that money flows to them, so that we're not put in a position where we have lots of artists who are in dire straits.
That's I mean, that's a lot to get through in the first few weeks or months. It must have been a whirlwind. But now we're 3 months on. How is the Belfry coping with COVID in mid-June?
Stressfully, I would say, it's in an odd kind of way. While there's a much reduced level of activity in the building, there's a tremendous amount of activity in how do we secure our financial position to continue to support our staff and our artists. So we spend a lot of time about those conversations. We keep making plans as the world changes and shifts around us. We have those ongoing discussions and dialogue about when do we start, how do we start, what are we starting with, and what does that look like? How soon, for the few staff that we do have who would normally have been laid off in the summer and who are now on layoff, how soon can we bring them back? What do we engage them with? How do we keep them active and contributing to the health of the organization and the community? So we have those conversations in an ongoing way, and we have staff who continue to work on our community connections and to keep those alive and active. And we do work on the building because it's an old building and it always needs work.
What about survivability? I'll just ask you the blunt question. I mean, I talk as a journalist to business owners all the time. They're struggling. Nonprofits all over the place are struggling, and some are asking if they'll survive. Will the Belfry survive?
The Belfry will definitely survive. The Belfry was in a healthy financial situation, has always been in a healthy financial situation. And with the work that we've done on the building and kind of increases in programming and community activity, we've certainly put some stress on the financial reserves that the company had, but we've not depleted them. We're secure that way. It is a stressful time in stretching those resources and stretching them again and then restretching them as things get longer and longer before we know we can resolve. We know that we're the last industry, or one of the last industries, that can come back in any kind of really significant way because of mass gathering restrictions. But yeah, we're going to survive. It's going to be difficult. Our patrons were amazingly supportive to us. We had over 3,000 of our patrons, ticket buyers, subscribers, who donated the value of the remainder of their subscription back to us. Others just took it as a credit against, future subscriptions. It was a really heartwarming time to have that kind of response from our audiences. They're very loyal. They value us highly, and I think that really came to light, which kind of helps with some of the stresses, knowing that we've got that kind of community support.
And so, as you say, the theater is one of the last buildings to be reopened. Can you even predict when you'll put bums back in seats, or how do you plan for that, when you'll be able to reopen?
We plan for it by being as optimistic as we can. So we talk about how we do a limited audience production, for example, which is likely where we will start in 2021, with obviously keeping within the guidelines of public health, keeping our audiences, our staff, and our artists safe, and following those guidelines in order to do that. But starting in that limited capacity way, and with some live streaming or not, or audiences and live streaming, like those conversations continue to happen, but we struggle to find a way to ensure that we come back. And and that we start bringing people back into this building, because the building doesn't have the plague. It's, you know, it's a space that breathes life when people are here. And so we need to get people back into the facility to be part of the community. So we work towards that. And we, in the meantime, we struggle to stretch the resources we have to ensure that we can keep people safe, we can keep people employed for as long as possible, and that we're ready to go and have the resources to go when it's ready to start full on again.
And Michael, you mentioned you're putting a lot of thought and consideration into what you will reopen with when the time comes. I know you can't announce that today, and you're still going through that. But once you've made a decision, will it be just as it has been in any other year, preparing and getting your season opener together, or how will it compare to years past?
Well, already it's strange, because we've, as I've been saying, we okay, we'll start on this date, and then as things progress, we'll start on this date, and as things, we keep kind of changing where the start date is. And so there've been a lot of, I've cast shows like over and over again, and then either uncast them or, just gotten rid of that show because those people are no longer available now that we've changed the schedule. So there's kind of things kind of on hold, kind of in like a waiting room to happen. It's been amazing, actually. The entire staff have been kind of fluid, and I'm just impressed with the way everybody's been kind of riding the waves of the now we know, now we don't know, now we know, now we don't. So I've sort of taken a page from everybody else and stepped back a little bit from trying to keep chasing it, and just know that I have to wait and see, and those plans that I have at the moment may all alter again. But there are people at the moment, there's a couple of casts that are waiting to find out what happens, but everybody, a designer that I've been working with on a show that we may or may not do, said one day, you know what, she said, don't worry about contracts, don't worry about anything, we'll work on the show, we'll figure out how we would put it on stage, and when it happens, it'll happen, and we can't know anything more than that. So I've been learning from the people around me. Yeah.
Artists across the spectrum are going online, just as we're doing here. I mean, we'd love to have people with us, but sometimes you do the next best thing. What are your thoughts on the potential of putting performances online?
I think it's great during this period of time that people that theater companies are addressing the lack of performances, and that audiences are interested in engaging. I mean, I think it's a great way to kind of keep people, remind people that theater is still alive, and we are all still here, and things will be happening. But I don't know that I subscribe to the opinion that the world of theater will never be the same again, and that virtual performances will be the wave of the future. I think there is the possibility of reaching out to communities that are too small to have their own company, or that rarely get to see certain kinds of work. I think that there's potential there for the virtual performances, but I think anybody who loves theater knows that it's as much about the audience gathering and the fact that there's live people on stage, and there's something, one of the most magical things about theater is the way an idea can kind of float from the stage to an audience. And an audience member sitting down here can see people up there, and you're aware of everyone receiving the same story and being moved by the same things and engaging with the same ideas. And I think that part of theater is irreplaceable on screen, and I think is why this kind of archaic setup is still happening and will continue to, in my belief.
Ivan, it may seem too soon for lessons learned, but what do you think? What has the pandemic taught you? There's been so many challenges, but what have you learned as a result?
Well, internally at the Belfry, what I've learned is that for an institutional organization, that we have the capacity to be really fluid in terms of how we approach our planning, how we approach about thinking about what comes next, and that's been an inspiring thing for me to know that it's institutions have a reputation. Arts institutions have a reputation for, you plan well in advance, and that's what you're doing, and you stick with it, and so the reaction time is about how well do you guess what the topic of the month is going to be in 9 months, as opposed to being in a situation that we're kind of in now, where you see the concern of the world shift. Because a month ago, the only thing we were talking about was COVID-19, and today it's really fallen down on the news list for most people. Certainly the people that I know and talk to, it's not part of the conversation right now. It's just a thing that we have to deal with and cope with. The conversation is very much about race, about racism, about brutality, about the need for systemic change. And so I think what it's taught me is that the organization is capable of systemic change. We just have to open ourselves up for the kinds of action that means, and we have to open ourselves up for the release of the power structure that we know. And I see that not just in this organization, but again, in the conversations I have on a national level, I'm seeing it more and more, where people are realizing that the grasp on power doesn't feel as comfortable as it once did, and likely should never have been comfortable. So what I'm learning is adaptability, I think. And I think what the organization is learning is adaptability. And I think what the community is learning is adaptability.
Michael, what about yourself? What lessons have you learned thus far?
Well, one, I think, picking up on what I was saying about being fluid, it kind of surprised me that, in the rehearsal hall, I feel like I'm quite, I can kind of improvise and kind of be creative and think on my feet. I found the beginning of all of this, I found it really difficult to not have this normal structure that we have of coming into the office and all of that. It's taken me a long time to try to adjust, and it surprised me that although I can play in the rehearsal hall, I seemed to need much more structure outside of it. But I think the big thing that I've learned, I think, is that that our community looks to us to be leaders more than just a theater company, and I think it came partly from the response to Ivan's treatment of the artists and the staff when all of this hit. What he was talking about earlier about the thoughtful and empathetic and generous approach that he took, and there was a lot of reaction from our patrons that they were proud of the way that the Belfry was behaving, and that what we do in the community is important to our patrons. That it's not just, they don't just come to see plays, but they want us to be responsible citizens. And as Ivan said, now in the midst of Black Lives Matter and addressing all of that, we're examining ourselves, and we're reaching out to diverse artists who've been here to make sure that they haven't felt misused or mistreated or slighted. And actually, kind of coincidentally, before all of that started, one of the things that we had been working on after COVID hit, Taiwo Afalabi and myself have been kind of looking at all of our operations and seeing how we can better integrate the diverse and the non-diverse community in Victoria, and how the Belfry can kind of help make that happen. So, I'm really kind of excited by a bigger view of the Belfry in the community that I hadn't been totally aware of.
We are able to take a few questions from our online viewers, and this one doesn't surprise me. It was going through my head. I don't know, Michael or Ivan, if it's best directed to one of you, but please, can we have a Christmas Carol back? Live stream or however, I really missed it last year, says the writer. Thanks for the question. And who wants to take that one? I mean, they're just reflecting the community, aren't they? Yeah. People love this production.
It's certainly something we talk about every year, and every year there's a reason why we do or we don't. I think we're probably ready for it. I have a feeling that given everything that's happened, that when we once again have a show in December, it might very well be Christmas Carol because it's such a community piece. Am I speaking out of turn?
No, I don't think so at all. I think, it's seasons are all about balance, artistically as well as financially. And so sometimes finances win over the potential of doing Christmas Carol. I don't think that that's going to remain true over the long time. And it certainly will be coming back soon. So we know it's popular, and we know that it's overdue. So it'll be here soon.
We have another question from one of our YouTube viewers. You've said you will be examining the diversity of board and senior staff. Are you able to make any specific commitments regarding this?
Yeah, I guess the discussion about, I'll start at board level. The discussion at board level has been there for a year, and I think that we were making approaches to people about coming on stream in the next year. Obviously the board changes at the AGM, and that's when it can change. Given COVID over the last couple of months, there was a real sense that we wanted to maintain the board as it exists for another year. So does that delay it for a year? It does and it doesn't. We've had this habit at the Belfry of introducing new board members during the course of the year. And while we can't officially have them as board members because they were not elected by the membership of the society, we can have them there and have voice at the board table. So I think I will certainly be stepping up efforts with the board and the recruitment committee of the board to broaden the voice at that table. The representation there is definitely not diverse enough. In terms of staff, I mean, I will say that the Belfry has a manager of community and artistic connection, Taiwo, whom Michael mentioned earlier, who has been doing significant work in terms of kind of building the bridge between us and the diverse community on the South Island. And that activity will continue, and likely we'll try and apply more resources to that. We also have an Indigenous cultural advisor who's part of our full-time staff, and again, we'll step up the resources for that. So in terms of financial resources, we'll be definitely increasing those resources in those areas over the next many years. In terms of senior staff, well, that's when do Michael and I retire? So I can't speak for Michael. I know that my personal feeling is that my time is coming up, and that somebody younger and certainly a diverse voice needs to be sitting in my chair.
Michael, your thoughts on that, or even how a reflection on diversity and a commitment to telling stories from diverse communities has informed your play choices in the past?
That definitely has been part of the decision-making factor as far as programming goes. I know, yeah, I'll echo what Ivan said. I know my time is probably drawing near. I don't know that we have, I can't say that we have been grooming anybody yet, and nor do I necessarily think it's my place to really do that, but we need to, we have been having some discussions, Ivan and I, and I do also think that right at the moment, with all the things that are happening, there is value in having stability. I don't know that this would be the time right now to make a major change, but certainly we're getting close.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a question, but a comment from the YouTube site. I'm among those proud of how the Belfry has managed to be a leader in addressing social issues, as well as their commitment to the people in the organization. I know it's not a question, but do you want to respond to that?
I guess it would be to say that the Belfry's always been an ethical part of the community and continues to maintain that position. We're a proud member of this community, and we think that overall the community is fair. Does it have work to do? Yeah. Does the Belfry have work to do? Yeah, a lot of work to do. And, to kind of respond to that comment and echo back to the previous question about, do we have a strong succession plan? What is it? We have succession plans like most organizations. Does it need now a broader conversation about what that plan really means and how it's reflecting a changing community? Absolutely. Do we need to be taking stronger actions to be even better than how some people perceive us? Absolutely, because not everybody perceives us that way. And we need to work harder on making it true, no matter what community you belong to.
On the topic of community, we've heard from Belfry subscribers and fans from Salt Spring writing in. As we come out of COVID, they write, is there the potential for the Belfry to be more intentionally serving rural, including First Nations communities near Victoria?
I would say touring has not generally been part of our activities. But again, things are changing, and we need to look at all of our operations and see how best we can serve the community and address the kind of new world order. And maybe this is the time for us to this might be an instance where virtual theater can help address some of these desires.
Yeah, for sure. I think there was in our strategic plan, there's always been a kind of vague reference to whether touring is part or not part, and it kind of has been removed. But honestly, when I look at our strategic plan now, given the kind of changes that have occurred over the year, and certainly the kinds of conversations that are going on now about the BIPOC communities, that plan needs to be reviewed again. And it needs to be reviewed with a serious eye to how we're addressing not only the BIPOC communities, but whether we're serving broader communities properly, that's Indigenous or rural.
We have a question of clarification. We've touched on it, but the remainder of the shows from the 2019-2020 season, are they gone forever, or might we see them back in a future season?
They were part of one version of the next season, and not in another. What I realized was, because so many people were so generous about donating their money back from those tickets, to reprogram 1979, which was the play that we canceled at the end of the season, felt like we were asking people to pay twice for the same show. So, and then also it's just, whether a piece fits into the entire mix or not. So it is a piece that I think belongs on this stage at some point for sure. But not immediately, I wouldn't say.
Are you considering a physically distanced seating plan? Because of course you can't squeeze everybody in, but people will wonder whether you might get 49 people in here with spacing.
We have that in place now. So, we've looked at plans. We've looked at how we deal with people in the lobby and how we move people about the building. And then there are challenges. It's an old building. It's not a new design. And it's an old building that's been modified for its current purpose. So there are challenges, but no, we do have a seating plan. We do have an ability to do smaller audiences and keep people physically distanced. It then becomes a question of, at the end of last year, we had over 4,000 subscribers, and with limited seats, in order to try and get an ability for each of them to attend, we'd be running, 2.5 times longer than we're running now, easily, probably more. I haven't actually worked out the math, but so that, there's only so many weeks in a year, and we already have a fairly tight schedule in the building. But yeah, we've got that plan, and it's certainly part of, as we talk about a 2021 season, really a 21 season, because it wouldn't be starting in 20, but as we talk about that season, we talk about its kind of startup as being a limited audience, physically distanced audience, and then increasing that as public health allows.
Can we talk about the other part of that idea?
We can.
So there is a kind of plan with the first show back that we would do limited seating in the Belfry, and then live stream every performance. So if you were a subscriber that came on the second Thursday, you could either choose to be one of, say, 45 people here in the building, which would be a fairly safe way of returning and a kind of gentle way of reintroducing people to the Belfry, or you could stay home and live stream. And
so
the
hybrid model.
a hybrid, yeah. And the exciting part, artistically, I think, is we've talked about perhaps having the camera people kind of on stage, so you're potentially not just getting a poor version of what the live audience is seeing, but seeing something different, and you might be, shooting from upstage past the actors, and so and actually kind of making the camera work part of the blocking that we do in the rehearsal hall, part of the staging that we come up with, and not just something that we add on at the end.
Is there a twinge of excitement in there rather than just coping?
Yeah, I think there is. I think it's a really interesting way of dealing with it, I think. And I think my hunch is that people will want to come back, and people will also want to see the show from a different viewpoint than they would normally see.
Just before we wrap up, when can people expect to know, and I know this with every interview I do these days, you really can't say for sure. When might be a best guess, Ivan, as to when you'll have a clearer idea of the season to come and when it might be able to start?
We're making plans now to do a modified subscription renewal campaign in late August, early September. I'm kind of hoping it's late August that we can start letting people know. So with that comes kind of formal public announcements about what we're doing, how we're approaching it, those kinds of things. So our plan today, based on today, is that, kind of late August, we'll be back on sale for a 2021 season, and that season will really be starting in 21. It won't be starting in the fall of 20, as we continue to adapt to the changing world. That's not to say there will be no activity in the building in the fall. We don't know that yet. But in terms of performance activity, we're expecting that in the spring of 21, and we're expecting that we're in communication with our subscribers about being able to renew, how they can renew, what that means, whether it's online or in person, in August.
And looking at a 3-play season, so we would get 3 plays in from February to the end of May.
Well, it's good to be back here at a physically distant, the appropriate distance and space, and I wish you the best and hope it all goes as well as it can.
Thanks so much, Gregor.
Thanks a lot,
Thank you.
Gregor.